Welcome back, folks. We are going to move into our final sessions for today on the main stage. As more of our lives are transformed into virtual illusions orchestrated by AI systems, how will programmers and designers overcome the overwhelming pressure to simply give the people what they want and instead encode the serendipity and seemingly randomness of real life into future systems? Or will such randomness be designed into a gamified and illusion-based future so that human desires can be more easily manipulated? What happens to a society or to an individual when placed into an echo chamber and exposed to only what we want to encounter or have been convinced we want to encounter? Iorio, Director of Innovation at IEEE, sits down with BC Biermann, founder of the Heavy Projects, to ask these questions and more. Please join me in welcoming BC and Jay to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jay Iorio.
BC Biermann.
I'd like to start off with a scenario, a future scenario. Let's say a generation from now, some of the technologies that we're all very familiar with, specifically augmented reality, what we call the Internet of Things, and various other related technologies. As they converge over the next generation, we're really going to be living in a sentient environment. The built environment will acquire almost an alive intelligence, and we will each have sort of our own customized view of the world that changes according to various factors and inputs. One of the necessary components, I think, of that is going to be a strong AI backbone. Humans cannot make the decisions in real time as to, what is the appropriate content, for example, and that raises a lot of questions, some of which we're going to touch on. One of the things that interests me is the role that randomness plays in the physical world. How many relationships we have that depended on missing a train, how many inadvertent lessons people teach their children by watching bad behavior on the street, how many things we experience that we would choose not to experience, political views, musical genres, yet they can inspire us in a variety of ways. I'm convinced that randomness, that serendipity of life, is an essential piece that might be very difficult to gamify. How do you program that? And does this lead to a kind of social control on the part of the programmers, basically, the ones who imbue the systems with the intelligence? And what are the philosophical implications of this? How do you program randomness? This is the audience, I think, to be looking at that, especially at this phase in the development of AR, wearables, body computing, IoT, and so on. So that's what BC and I would like to sort of bounce around for a few minutes here. Would you like to jump in?
Yeah, so thank you, Jay, for that lead-in. This is really the culmination of many hours of discussion that we've had, I think, over a strong drink, and just topics that we're interested in philosophically, technologically, personally, ethically, and what we're wrestling with, in a sense, is this one. On the one hand, you've got a set of technologies that is, in some ways, they've been around, in other ways, they're coming of age, and they're in a bit artificially siloed. So AR, VR, and AI really are converging. And we see AI as a sort of a backbone of AR and VR, but ultimately we won't be talking in terms of AR and VR, but really just this broader topic of what's called mixed reality. So some of the things we've really found interesting and we think should have a robust discussion of, not of just technologists and engineers, but artists and philosophers should all be part of this discussion, because we know that it's coming, and it is here in some ways. But what do we do with it? and how do we sort of adopt it in ways that push it in directions that are for the social good? I understand, and we certainly understand the need for monetization, but we have also questions about social concerns, ethical concerns, physiological concerns, cognitive concerns. And we think this is sort of the right place to at least start the discussion about some of the other sides of how this technology is adopted. So one of the things that Jay mentioned is this concept of randomness. And this is really an old discussion, right? This is a theological discussion in many ways. The old debate between Calvinists and Arminians. Do we have free will or don't we? How do we program this notion of serendipity? As a designer, it's something I call a happy accident. Those things that we stumble upon, that we learn from ultimately, and then we sort of grow from those experiences. My work in augmented reality sort of was in reaction to public space, advertising, and messaging being held in the hands of the few. We saw augmented reality as a way to sort of make incursion into public spaces legally and sort of problematize the ubiquity of public space messaging that was primarily just corporate. Well, this becomes somewhat exacerbated in the realms of AI and VR. If these technologies become sort of consolidated into the hands of a few, well then that serendipity becomes this sort of an artificial, potentially artificial push in the interest of those few. So that's something that we're sort of wondering about, like, how do we prevent these technologies becoming just a bigger echo chamber for stuff that we just want to see and catering to our own self-interest? How do we allow for new information to come into this arena? I guess the closest analog would be a sonic analog in terms of Pandora. You know, this notion that it's giving you music that you hadn't pre-programmed. Is there a visual genome system that might be a part of this new ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, look at the forces that are really dominant. You have commercial forces, and you have the natural desire to see and experience what you like. I mean, even I'm concerned about this, but even I adjust my Facebook feed to see things, to avoid things I don't want to see. I will exclude certain genres of music, for example, certain types of movies, and I'm somebody who's actually very concerned about this. I feel, you know, so it's very seductive to get what you want. Give the people what they want is a natural commercial instinct. It underlies all of the work that's really being done. And it's very hard to make the argument, I think, that a good product is not going to give you what you like. A good product is going to, you know, expose you to things that you might not want to be exposed to. In the same way that a muscle only grows when it encounters resistance, this sort of what I think of as the suburbanization of the mind, the gated community, is a sort of mental gated community where we start to live under an illusion that the entire world is like us and we have very little tolerance for people who deviate, even in minor ways. I think that could have very negative effects. I can't see any positive effects to that. So we're starting to see the foothills of it now with Pandora, for example, you know, a more intelligent algorithm than this is what you listened to before, and here are some things that are just like it. It really actually tries to do what we're talking about, but these are really the foothills of a coming mountain range, I think. How do we do that? How do we make it so that we don't naturally go towards the echo chamber that everything conspires to put us into?
So I'm going to jump to, I think, another but important but related question, sort of down this same trail, is that, you know, yes, we can do these technologies, and you know, VR is not going to get worse. The resolution is going to get better. The lag rates are going to get better. So we're creating a new reality that looks very similar to the one that we're in. But just because you can doesn't mean we should. Modernity sort of takes that question for granted without really thinking about it. And maybe just from personal experience, I come from an academic background, but also a developer background. And when I have my developer hat on, I get very immersed in problem solving. And this can take months, in some cases years, when I'm tunneling down a particular problem that I'm trying to solve technologically. And it can be very rewarding. But then there's this other side of me, and there's sort of an existential, not crisis, but I go back and forth with, okay, why am I doing this again? You know, what is the telos of the work that I'm putting all these years of my life towards? And to be sort of self-reflective and ask those critical questions about, okay, why are we doing this? You know, I understand the sort of the human draw to the novel, and I fit right in that category. But at the end of the day, you know, I do have to sort of be reflective on, okay, my own work, and why have I engaged the X many years, now it's been over a decade, into augmented reality? For what reason? Is there a larger reason than sort of my own gain in some senses? And I think that there is, and I hope that there is. But to have that conversation, to have others challenge me on that conversation has always been sort of a helpful part of my process. And these are very, very powerful technologies. And I think that's part of the reason that we're all here, is we understand the power of these technologies. And it will only become amplified once these technologies converge in very meaningful ways. And we're sort of dealing with weak AI now. And I'm hopeful that we won't sort of infantilize AI and these technologies to sort of this virtual butler status, or just help me find a closer restaurant or a better form of travel. But ultimately, for larger questions about, okay, human endurance, human evolution, my 1.5-year-old and my 5-year-old don't care about, you know, if I can find a better way, a better route to San Jose. They do care about, ultimately, or will care about, you know, the curing of incurable diseases. So I think it's about how we push these technologies and have these discussions about how they can be pushed. I think is important, certainly as these real nation stages, actually.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You know, when you're involved in a project, and everybody here is involved in projects probably, and you tend to focus, you're doing very innovative work, and it's almost counterproductive to start to consider some of these considerations. They get in the way. Sometimes it's good to put the blinders on and just focus. But we have multiple communities of developers doing that. And it's almost as though technology takes on a life of its own. In fact, I think there's a common misperception that it's almost like a force of nature. It's like a hurricane or something that we can't control. But in fact, it's really the quintessential human endeavor. It's tool making. It's using our minds to create abstract tools in virtuality and software. And I think that the best thing that could happen would be if it became a routine thing for people working on development teams to discuss these issues, to look at the larger social implications of what they're doing. It couldn't hurt, and it could probably change the way some products are developed and projects, you know, programs proceed.
Yeah, that tunnel vision tends to limit vision, and I think that vision in terms of problem solving is important, but also that sort of higher level reflection can sometimes get in the way. But ultimately, I think it actually can produce, if we're just talking about a product, it can produce a better product. You know, the purpose of the university ultimately is to put people of different spheres and domains of inquiry into sort of the same space and have them work together, right? So it helps me to work with engineers, it helps the engineers hopefully to work with artists and philosophers and vice versa. And so I think sometimes we become arbitrarily siloed in the interest of building something in particular, but I don't know if that siloing is actually ultimately the best thing even for the product itself.
No, in fact, it's sort of an analog of the echo chamber. In a sense, it's an intellectual echo chamber when you're only working within a community. I think interdisciplinary work, cutting across the campus, for example, bringing in artists, storytellers into these technical discussions. In a sense, we're trying to avoid the echo chamber of everybody who knows the same stuff, and we keep repeating it back to each other as though it's the first time we've heard it. This brings different points of view, different orientations in, and it's in a sense an intellectual way for the academic community to sort of break the silos down and to avoid the echo chamber that we're talking about. So it's in a way a metaphor of the technology itself, you know, what the people are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's a realistic assessment of human nature. Only speaking personally and anecdotally, I mean, I do sort of on a daily basis have this impeding impulses between I'm going to throw all of my technology off the Huntington Pier into the ocean, and on the other hand, these are the most amazing creative tools, and I feel just so, you know, lucky to be alive at this time.
Yeah.
And I think both of those are valid, and I think I draw a little bit of strength from both. But at the end of the day, sort of like what does make us happy long term? What is fulfilling for us, and how do these technologies sort of can they fill into those spaces in meaningful ways? And I'm hopeful that they can.
I'm convinced they can in some form. I guess that's just optimistic nature, but yeah, I think that in a way we all share that ambivalence about it, and it's happening so quickly. Anybody who's, you know, in this field knows. I mean, you see the last 3 years even of development in AR and related technologies, and it's remarkable. It's embarrassing to a futurist. You can't really predict things like that because people think you're crazy. So I saw things this year that I was telling people last year, yeah, 3 or 4 years, this is going to be routine, and here it is. So it's sort of like Moore's Law squared in a way. It's a strange curve. But it looks like we're running out of time. We're just getting warmed up. I'd like to leave you all with just the, you know, this is where the leaders in this field are. You're all like some of the real pioneers in this work. And what you all do over the next generation is really going to affect society, and potentially in remarkable and positive ways. And all we want to do is sort of foster this conversation, raise some of the questions, and get a conversation going.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.